Welcome into another episode of the Install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Greg, I'm fired up, not just because we have training camp. I just booked my flights for the preseason games earlier this week. It's, travel is on the horizon, getting closer and closer to week one for at least this team, the Titans, opening up in New Orleans. Going to be a fun training camp, though, between now and then.
Are you going to Minnesota?
I will be in Minnesota, yes.
Good for you, because New England's going to be at your place, right?
Yep, New England's coming here, and then joint camp at Minnesota the week before that. So it should be a lot of fun competition out there, I think.
No, I think it will. Minnesota's a good team. I think your offense will get a pretty good sense of what they are and what they need to work on, which is exactly what training camp is for. Because Minnesota, with the new coordinator Brian Flores, he's very aggressive, and I'm sure they'll be practicing a lot of those kinds of things. So it'll give the Titans offense a chance to work against an aggressive pressing defense that is very proactive, and you want to be able to get that kind of work in practice.
Yeah, and certainly, they're already at the point a weekend that they're getting tired of seeing one another. So I'm sure they're looking forward to.
Just if I may ask, who's kind of, again, training camp is training camp, and
Sure.
I've been to many in my career, and you and I have discussed that people both react positively and negatively, overly as such.
Mm-hmm.
But who would you say has been positive in this first week or so?
Arden Key, there's no question.
I loved Arden Key. We talked about that when they signed him.
Yeah, I think he's going to really work well here, Greg. And they seem to with him and Weaver and Harold looks as good as I've seen Harold look pre-ACL, like Harold Landry.
Now you still have Autry and Simmons.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting.
This is a really good defensive line, by the way, and a lot of depth.
Yes,
Hart is still there, and he played really well. When he played. So I mean, this is a really good D line.
Yeah, I would say that is going to be the saving grace of this football team. If nothing else, you can look at that defensive front and think they've got a pretty good situation in front of them. And certainly, to be honest, we thought that might be some kind of an indictment, as we talked about last week with the offensive line. But in the past couple of days since they've had the pads on, you've seen a lot of good snaps and a lot of situational football, obviously, but a lot of really good snaps.
That's the game, situational football. That's the game.
A lot of really good snaps from that offensive line group right now. So it's going to be interesting to watch how this plays out.
Well, it's funny you say that, because, and then we'll get to what we want to talk about. But
sure.
I've talked to some coaches this offseason that have all made this point, that if you can't play on third down on either side of the ball, whether you're offense or defense, that you can't play in this league, that you've got to be able to play on third down, and that's critical. So, that may be the most important situation in the game. I mean, obviously red zone is critical too. It's obvious you want to score touchdowns and not field goals, but there tends to be more third downs than red zone opportunities throughout the course of a season. So you really have to be able to function on third down on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and for a team that led the league in 3 and outs last year, nobody understands that better than Titans fans, I'm certain.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, Greg, we'll have plenty of time to talk about camp competitions and things like that. There's a really interesting quarterback competition, as a matter of fact, for the backup job here in Tennessee.
With Levis and Willis.
Between Levis and Willis. And that, as I was just kind of thinking about it, that there's not a ton of starting quarterback jobs open at any given point in an offseason, but there are a couple of competitions going on right now that at least garner some degree of curiosity.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your perspective on some of the players who will be competing for starting jobs in this league. Tampa Bay seems a great place to start with everything that's left in the wake of Tom Brady. Baker Mayfield coming in, and Kyle Trask, a former second-round pick there. It sounds like Kyle Trask got his first opportunity to run with the ones here recently in the last week. But I wonder what you make of that competition right now that's playing out with the Bucs.
Well, the big question, and again, Kyle Trask has not played in the NFL hardly at all. And so I don't really know what he's looked like the last couple of years. I remember him studying him in great detail when he had that great year at Florida, and obviously, was very good. It's college football. It's a little different animal than the NFL. But I remember thinking that he was not a great prospect for this reason. And again, I haven't seen him in the last couple of years. He was essentially a pocket quarterback. He did not have particularly light feet. And while he had a good arm, he certainly didn't have a big arm. It was better than average, but it wasn't, wow, he's a big-time thrower of the football from the pocket. So I kind of viewed him in many ways as a guy that would likely end up being a backup. Now, he's getting an opportunity, and you don't know. Because obviously Baker Mayfield, who was a #1 pick in a draft and has had good moments in the NFL, and clearly is a more gifted guy than Kyle Trask. We'll see what happens. I would bet, barring anything unforeseen, that Baker Mayfield would win the job, but they have to get through training camp, and we'll see what happens.
From your standpoint, Greg, Baker's obviously had a little bit of a different situation since being the #1 overall pick a couple of years ago. What he was able to do or not do within the Ram system last year, what was kind of your evaluation of where Baker was at that point in his career?
Yeah, Baker to me has always been a little bit of a dilemma because Baker actually throws the ball very well. I've talked to coaches who've coached him, and it's funny, they all like him. There's a certain public perception of Baker. You and I don't know him, we're not around him on a daily basis, but coaches who coach him like him, and they think he can be a good player. He throws a really good ball. I think he has a tendency, and this is a tape study point, I think he has a tendency at times to get a little frenetic. He starts to play a little fast. And when he starts to play fast, he rushes his mechanics. And when he rushes his mechanics, he loses his ball location a little bit. And he's a ball location thrower. I remember watching him at Oklahoma in that last year. And, I had this sense that he was a movement guy. And I watched a ton of him. In fact, I watched every third down as well as a lot of other plays. And I remember coming away thinking, God, this guy's a pocket player. He's not immobile. He's not a statue, but he's essentially a pocket quarterback. And when you're a pocket quarterback, you have to play with a comfort and a poise and a composure in the pocket. And he does have a tendency to start to play fast and rush himself. And you can take care of that to some degree with your play design and your route concepts and route combinations. But as we said a moment ago, when you do get to third down, sometimes you can't take care of that, and the defense has a tactical advantage. And that's when you have to be calm and poised and aware. And I think he tends to rush himself at times.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what Tampa tried to accomplish, even with Brady last year, undermined by the offensive line injuries.
Yes.
So we'll
Even
see.
Brady started to play fast, and you never saw that really. I mean, Brady, that was one of the things out of many, many that made Brady great is he always seemed so composed. And, even he started to play fast.
Yeah, no, that's the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned Baker and, where his mechanics might fall off in those moments. The most mechanically sound quarterback that many of us or any of us have ever seen, Tom Brady, went through a similar situation last year. So not exclusive just to Baker Mayfield, quarterbacks in general. It's tough to perform when your offensive line is insufficient in front of you. Now to San Francisco, Greg, where I mean, convoluted is a word that I would use for the Niners situation, although it seems like they have a pretty clear idea of what they want. Brock Purdy medically cleared at this point. We'll see, how much he's able to do and how soon. They do have Sam Darnold, who they brought in, and of course, Trey Lance, who a lot of draft capital was given up to go and acquire. But it does seem like they have a comfort level in Purdy that should make him the leader in the clubhouse in this thing, no?
I would think so. And the fact is the team and the organization knows that Purdy can do it because he did it last year and got them to the NFC Championship game. And obviously he got hurt in that game, and that changed the game totally. But, Purdy ran that offense with a pretty high level of efficiency. And it's funny, we just talked about poise and composure. He played that way for a young quarterback. I remember the game in which he came in. It was against Miami. And Miami is a difficult defense to play against because the previous Miami D coordinator, Josh Boyer, I believe it was, very, very aggressive, a lot of blitz. And I remember watching that tape and seeing Purdy deal with the pressure so comfortably. And, when you see that with a guy coming in essentially off the street. I mean, the guy was, Mr. Irrelevant, and there were a lot of people that didn't even have him as a priority free agent. And here he comes in and he looks very composed. He knew where to go with the football. He saw things clearly. It just seems as if the game is slow to him. And, that's one of the things I think that we've been struggling to see from Sam Darnold throughout his career. Sam Darnold is a big physical guy, very good arm, has excellent mobility, but it just seems as if that, the elimination and isolation portion of his game, the ability to eliminate what's not there and isolate where to go within the timing and structure of the pass game, at times he really struggles with that. And Purdy did not seem to struggle with that, particularly in the context of an offense that is not that easy to figure out. So I would agree with you. I think Purdy, if healthy, will be the starting quarterback.
And that, that seems to be where things are trending, just reading reports coming out of San Francisco at this point. And, Greg, I think it's just such a great lesson for people who, look at somebody like Trey Lance, who all the issues that you want to talk about with the COVID sample size, how much film was not there for him in the evaluation process to scout and to kind of assess how he might make sense at the next level, and everything that's transpired since. It's not always the most athletically gifted or the highest drafted player who ends up being the best fit for an offense or for a
keep in mind,
staff.
He could be, but the point is he hasn't
Sure.
played a lot of football since 2019. We are now in 2023, Buck.
Yeah.
And so people can say that, oh, they made a mistake. That's always easy to say. But because he's not played a lot of football, he's still a work in progress, which is kind of normal if you haven't played a lot of football. But it's not a work in progress roster. It's a roster ready to perform at a very high level. This is a roster that can compete for a Super Bowl. So they're not, my guess is, unless Lance is so good in camp, and again, we're only a week into camp, unless he's so good that he clearly is the guy and everybody on the team knows it, unless that's the case, it's not going to be Lance.
Yeah. At this point, Greg, Arizona's situation is complicated because of Kyler Murray's injury. They do have a couple of different players who are going to be vying for that spot for, one would think the bulk of the season, between Jeff Driscoll, Colt McCoy, and Clayton Tune, the rookie who was brought in this year. Your facial expression for the audio-only audience, I think, says a lot about what the state of the Cardinals quarterback is.
I did not love Clayton Tune on tape at the University of Houston, but if he appears to be ready through camp, and again, we're not there, but and ready involves many things, as you well know, Buck. You're at camp, you know what it involves. It's not just, hey, throw it to a guy. There's so many things that involve being ready at the NFL level to play quarterback. But if he shows that he is ready enough, I might give him an opportunity. Don't forget, it's a new coaching staff.
Yeah.
And, they're not, usually new coaching staffs don't come in with preconceived notions. They let things play out. And, they drafted him, obviously not a high pick, but they know what Jeff Driscoll is. We know what Colt McCoy is. If Clayton Tune can play to some degree, it might make sense to let him play until Kyler Murray's ready. Find out, hey, is this guy can this guy be an NFL quarterback? He's big. I remember I even asked him a question at the combine. He's a big kid. I mean, he's got some physical traits. He can move, he can throw it. There were some things I didn't like about him without going into all the detail, but if he's somewhat ready, I might give him the shot early in the season. I don't think there's a lot of pressure there. Granted, coaches always feel pressure. We know that. Sure. But I'm saying, they're not a Super Bowl roster right now. Not even close. So
I think Monty Ossenfort, who's the GM there, is pretty understanding about the situation that he's headed into based on how much draft capital for 2024 he's spent.
That's right. He
was
from Tennessee, so you probably know him a little bit. But I don't think I think they know in that building they're not competing for a Super Bowl this year.
Well, I don't know if Washington is going to be how competitive Washington should be. That division is pretty tough right now. But Jacoby Brissett and Sam Howell in a quarterback competition there, Greg. I mean, Brissett was a quality quarterback for the Browns last year. It felt like they got undermined by special teams and defense more often than not before Watson was available to them. Sure. And Howell is a bit of an unknown here. It seems like he is who Ron Rivera is going to go with at this point, though.
Well, I think they want to go with him. Again, they have to get through camp, and hopefully he plays well enough that they feel good about it. But I think the way that they're built right now, even if Brissett were to be the quarterback, I think that they want to run the football. they really like Brian Robinson. Now, he's not an explosive back, but he's a grinder and a sustainer. Um, essentially Gibson is somewhat like that as well. Then they drafted the Kentucky kid Rodriguez, who's exactly that guy, as you know,
Right.
from the SEC. So I think they want to grind it out, use play action, play to their defense. It's a very good defensive front. I think that's the way they want to let Howell get acclimated. But Howell's got some talent. And if you talk to people there, they'll tell you that he's even a little more talented than they thought when they drafted him. Because don't forget, he's a 6-foot quarterback, and again, even though height is not as big an issue as it might have been 10 or 12 or 15 years ago, Buck, it's still, you'd prefer your quarterbacks to be taller than 6 feet. He's a 6-foot quarterback who was kind of descending in college. His last year at North Carolina was not as good as the year prior.
Right.
Now, he lost a lot of players on his offense, but the bottom line is, if you just evaluate him, he was not as good as he was in his previous season. So that's the reason he was a 5th-round pick. He's 6 feet and he was a descending prospect, but he's got talent and he's got movement and he's tough and he's physical and he's competitive. They would like him to win the job.
Got a fun collection of skill position players, like you mentioned, and Eric Bieniemy, who's going to be the offensive coordinator there. It's fascinating to me.
I mean, they've got a really good group of receivers, really good group of wide receivers. So, and from what I understand, in talking to people, De'Ami Brown is finally taken a major step forward. He was the 2nd-round pick a few years ago out of North Carolina, who can run a little bit, and he really hadn't shown much in 2 years. But they say that this offseason was the offseason where, it's kind of come together. But they have McLaurin, they have Dotson. I mean, this is a really good group of wide receivers.
De'Ami Brown, one of several wide receivers who had not done a ton at that point to make a play on the Titans secondary. I think he had a 75-yard touchdown reception over Caleb Farley when the Titans played at Washington in week 5. But the state of the Titans secondary at that point, not ideal. One would
probably the mention of Caleb Farley did not go well at the moment with Titans fans.
One would think. I saw him on the practice field the other day with Drew Rosenhaus. It just looked like it was like seeing a ghost, Greg. I don't know what they do at that point, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about those kind of things as we continue with training camp. Unfortunately, got to jump to another podcast here to talk just about Titans training camp, but we always appreciate Greg's time. Make sure you subscribe and rate and review wherever it is that you get the podcast, and we'll be back at it next week ahead of a preseason game for the Titans at Chicago. Greg, I'm fired up.
All right, Buck, and I'll see you next week.
Yes, sir. You'll be in town. We'll do it live, like O'Reilly said, and we'll have a great time hanging out at Titans camp. I know you're excited to catch up with some of the coaches and kind of understand what their vision is for the 2020.
No question. Yeah, I really enjoy that. You learn a lot.
Well, we'll look forward to having Greg live and in person next week, and we'll do it all again on Wednesday. See you guys.